Today we begin with words written by Carl Gustav Jung in Aion, his masterwork on the psychological symbolism across 2 millennia of religious and esoteric thought. In Anno Mundi 2365, a great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter took place in Pisces. These 2 great planets, he says, are also the most important for the destiny of the world, and especially for the destiny of the Jews. The conjunction took place 3 years before the birth of Moses. This is, of course, legendary. Abarbanel expects the coming of the Messiah when there is a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces. He was not the first to express such expectations. 400 years earlier, we find similar pronouncements. For instance, Rabbi Abraham ben Hia, who died about 1136, is said to have decreed that the Messiah was to be expected in 1464, at the time of the Great Conjunction in Pisces, and the same is reported of Solomon ben Gabirol, 1020–70. These astrological ideas are quite understandable when one considers that Saturn is the star of Israel, and that Jupiter means the king of justice. Among the territories ruled by the fishes, the house of Jupiter, are Mesopotamia, Bactria, the Red Sea, and Palestine. Chiun, Saturn, is mentioned in Amos 5:26 as the star of your God. James of Sarug, d. 521, says the Israelites worshipped Saturn. The Sabaeans called him the God of the Jews. The Sabbath is Saturday, Saturn's day. Al-Bumasar testifies that Saturn is the star of Israel. In medieval astrology, Saturn was believed to be the abode of the devil. Both Saturn and Ialdabaoth, the Demiurge and Highest Archon, have lions' faces. Origen elicits from the diagram of Celsus that Michael, the first angel of the Creator, has the shape of a lion. He obviously stands in the place of Ialdabaoth, who is identical with Saturn, as Origen points out. The Demiurge of the Nasins is a fiery god, the 4th by number. According to the teachings of Apelles, who had connections with Marcion, there was a 3rd god who spoke to Moses, a fiery one, and there was also a 4th, the author of evil. Between the god of the Nasins and the god of Apelles, there is evidently a close relationship, and also it appears with Yahweh, the Demiurge of the Old Testament. What you're about to witness is a journey through time, symbol, and psyche. A careful examination of how one of humanity's most ancient celestial observers, the planet Saturn, has ruled and redirected religious and philosophical thought from Egypt to medieval Europe, from Gnostic temples to astrological charts. This is Irrevelato, a channel dedicated to revealing the hidden connections in cultural and religious history, the secrets you deserve to know, the lives and stories of luminaries and oftentimes gods. In this 2-hour exploration, we'll trace Saturn's transformations through stunning historical artwork, manuscripts, and astronomical charts. We'll examine direct quotations from Jung and other scholars, always maintaining rigorous attention to historical accuracy, while illuminating the profound psychological insights these ancient symbols contain. Each section builds upon the last and spans cultures and millennia. From Saturn's earliest appearances as the Black Star to its complex relationship with Jupiter, from its manifestation as the lion-faced Demiurge to its connection with the Sabbath, we'll strike the hammer on everything. Before we begin this journey, I want to thank you for being here. Your engagement, whether through likes, shares, or simply watching these videos through to completion, helps ensure this type of in-depth video essays, as bad as they are, reaches others who seek deeper understanding, who love wisdom, who would sacrifice themselves for truth and freedom, who bears the price of Lucifer and Prometheus. If that's what we need to move forward and realize that we are descendants of Plato, Socrates, Pythagoras, Thales, Nietzsche, Jung, Da Vinci, Tesla, Newton, Spinoza, Kierkegaard, and even deities or other alien form of life, either way, there's a reason why you are here. See it, seize it, conquer it. You'll find additional resources and ways to support this work in the description below. Now let us turn to Saturn itself and begin to understand why this distant planet came to embody some of our most profound and challenging religious concepts. Saturn, 6th planet from the Sun, represents one of humanity's most ancient and enduring celestial observers. Its steady yellowish glow, visible to the naked eye, moves with such deliberate slowness across the night sky that the Babylonians named it Kayamanu, the steady one. This astronomical constancy would prove deeply significant in shaping its symbolic meaning across cultures. What makes Saturn unique is its position as the last planet visible to the naked eye, establishing it as the boundary keeper of the known cosmos in ancient times. Its 29.5-year orbit around the Sun aligns remarkably with human generational cycles, making it a natural timekeeper of human lifespans. This orbital period, longer than any other visible planet, contributed to Saturn's association with the measurement of deep time itself. The planet's physical characteristics are equally remarkable. Its density is so low that it would float in a hypothetical ocean large enough to contain it, the only planet in our solar system with this property. Its magnificent ring system, though unknown to the ancients, seems to eerily prefigure its symbolic role as the bound god, the deity who was fettered except during the festival of Saturnalia. Even more intriguing is Saturn's hexagonal storm pattern at its north pole. A perfectly geometric formation that has persisted for decades at least, as if nature herself were affirming the ancient association between Saturn and sacred geometry. This remarkable feature wasn't discovered until the Voyager missions, yet it should make us think twice about our ancient observations about Saturn's connection to structure and limitation. And number 6, and what it represents. The earliest recorded systematic observations of Saturn come from Mesopotamian astronomical texts. The Babylonian priests tracked its movements with remarkable precision, naming it not only the steady star, but also the star of justice, a cosmic arbitrator whose slow, deliberate motion suggested the inexorable nature of fate and law. In Egyptian astronomy, Saturn held particular significance during the Old Kingdom period. Their ability to predict Saturn's position played a crucial role in their calendar systems and religious ceremonies. The Egyptian Saturn was associated with Horus the bull, the aged one, reflecting its slow movement and connection to time's passage. The Greek transformation of Saturn into Kronos marks a crucial conceptual development. Here, the astronomical body became personified as time itself. Not just chronological time, Kronos, but the force that limits and shapes all things, Kairos. This interpretation would profoundly influence both Neoplatonic philosophy and early Christian theology. The Romans would later elaborate this symbolism further, identifying Saturn as not just time's keeper, but as the god of the Golden Age, a paradoxical figure who both limited and liberated. Their most important temple, the Temple of Saturn at the foot of the Capitoline Hill, housed the state treasury, Aerarium, linking Saturn's timekeeping aspect to the measurement and storage of society's wealth. Saturn is also a philosopher, metaphorically speaking, of course. The concept of Saturn as a philosophical principle emerges most powerfully in Neoplatonic thought. Here, Saturn represents what the Greeks called peiros, the principle of limitation that gives form to the formless. This is the creative power of boundary setting that allows existence itself to take shape. As Jung notes in Ion, Saturn's position in medieval astrology was deeply ambivalent, both the greater malefic and yet also the ruler of contemplation and deep wisdom. This dual nature reflects Saturn's role in what alchemists would later call the nigredo, the blackening phase necessary for transformation. The black star becomes paradoxically the source of illumination through restriction. The philosophical Saturn also appears in Islamic thought, where it was known as Zuhal. The great philosopher Al-Biruni described it as the tester, the planet that reveals truth through trial and limitation. This connects to Saturn's Hebrew name, Shabtai, which shares its root with Shabbat, the day of rest that gives meaning to the days of work. This philosophical tradition reaches its apex in the Renaissance, where Saturn becomes associated with melancholia, what Marsilio Ficino called the divine madness that produces genius through contemplation. The Saturnian figure becomes the patron of philosophers, architects, and all those who work with the fundamental structures of reality. Saturn's relationship with Jupiter becomes crucial here. As Jung notes in studying medieval astrological traditions, their conjunction represents a moment of supreme cosmic tension between opposing principles. Jupiter represents expansion, growth, and social order. Saturn represents contraction, decay, and solitude. Their dance together creates the rhythm of time. This becomes especially significant in the Great Conjunction of 7 BC, which occurred in Pisces. As Jung explores in Ion, this conjunction, happening 3 times in 1 year, was seen as a moment of tremendous cosmic significance. The proximity of the planets, less than half the width of the full moon, created a brilliant celestial spectacle that would have been impossible to ignore. The cosmological Saturn also manifests in what medieval astrologers called the Thema Mundi, the birth chart of the world itself. Here, Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius, connecting it both to the depths of Earth and the heights of heaven. This dual rulership reflects Saturn's role as the bridge between the material and the spiritual realms. Most intriguingly, the Latin name Saturnus shares its root with saturare, to saturate or fill to completion. This connects to the god's role as both destroyer and preserver, the force that brings things to their natural conclusion, so that new cycles can begin. As the furthest visible planet, Saturn became the keeper of cosmic boundaries, marking the edge of the known universe until modern times. Here we arrive at the most profound aspect of Saturn, its role in the architecture of consciousness. Jung's Ion reveals something extraordinary. Saturn represents not just an external limiting force, but the essential principle of differentiation that makes consciousness possible. Consider the primal symbolism revealed in our sources. Saturn devours his children, yet from this apparent destruction comes the birth of a new order. Isn't this the psychological process Jung called individuation, the necessary separation and differentiation of consciousness from the unconscious matrix? The Saturnian principle of limitation becomes paradoxically the key to psychological freedom. This emerges with startling clarity in the symbolism of Saturn's bindings. As our sources indicate, the god statue in Rome was bound in wool throughout the year, liberated only during Saturnalia. This represents a profound psychological truth. The structures that appear to constrain us, Saturn, also define us. The boundaries of ego consciousness, symbolized by Saturn's rings, both limit and enable our existence as distinct beings. The black sun of Saturn. Its association with melancholy and the nigredo phase takes on new meaning here. As Jung notes, this blackness represents the necessary descent into the unconscious, the confrontation with what he called the shadow. Saturn's traditional association with lead in alchemy points to this same truth. The heaviest, darkest element contains the seed of transformation. Most remarkably, Saturn's position as the furthest visible planet creates a perfect metaphor for the boundary of consciousness itself. Just as Saturn marked the edge of the visible cosmos for ancient observers, psychologically it represents the frontier between the known, conscious, and unknown, unconscious aspects of psyche. This culminates in what might be called the Saturnian paradox. Only by accepting limitation do we find true freedom. The god who was bound brought liberation during his festival. The planet associated with restriction rules both the earthly sign of Capricorn and the revolutionary sign of Aquarius. The slowest planet teaches us about time's deepest mysteries. As Jung writes in Ion, the conjunction was characterized by the important fact that Mars was in opposition, which means, astrologically, that the planet correlated with the instincts stood in a hostile relationship to it. This precise astronomical observation becomes a perfect metaphor for the psychological process of maturation, the necessary tension between instinct, Mars, and structure, Saturn, that redirects the development of consciousness. In the end, Saturn emerges not just as a planet or a god, but as a fundamental principle of psychic organization, the force that through restriction creates form, through limitation enables freedom, and through time brings completion. The identification of Saturn's day with the Sabbath is one of the most profound conjunctions of astronomical, religious, and psychological patterns in human history. As Jung notes in Ion, the Sabbath is Saturday, Saturn's day. Al-Bumasar testifies that Saturn is the star of Israel. This seemingly simple observation opens into layers of meaning that will fundamentally change everything in terms of time and transcendence. Let us begin with astronomical architecture. The Babylonian system assigned planetary rulers to each day based on the Chaldean order, from slowest to fastest apparent motion. Saturn, the slowest visible planet, became ruler of the seventh day. This was no arbitrary assignment. Saturn's apparent motion, taking 29.5 years to complete its orbit, embodied the very principle of divine timing: slow, deliberate, inexorable. The Hebrew language preserves this cosmic connection. Shabbat, Sabbath, shares its root with Shabtai, Saturn. This linguistic bridge between the cosmic and the sacred reveals something remarkable. Unlike other ancient peoples who primarily sanctified space through temples and sacred sites, Judaism introduced the radical concept of sacred time. Saturn, lord of time and limitation, became the perfect celestial embodiment of this revolutionary idea. Consider the textual evidence. In Amos 5:26 we find Chiun, Saturn, named as the star of your God. James of Sarug, writing in the 6th century CE, explicitly states that the Israelites worshipped Saturn. The Sabaeans identified Saturn as the Jewish god. These point to a profound understanding of Saturn's nature as both limit-setter and liberator. I know it's paradoxical, but what isn't? The pattern deepens when we examine the numerical symbolism. Saturn, seventh traditional planet counting inward. Sabbath, seventh day. Saturn's orbit, approximately 29.5 years, 7s4.2. Sabbatical year, every 7 years. Jubilee follows 7 cycles of 7 years. This sevenfold pattern creates what Jung would call a psychoid reality, neither purely physical nor purely psychological, but a bridge between realms. The recurring number 7 appears in Saturn's planetary position, orbital resonances, and religious observances, suggesting a deeper archetypal pattern at work. The psychological dimension reveals itself in the paradox of liberation through limitation. Just as Saturn was bound in wool except during Saturnalia, the Sabbath represents bounded time, set apart through restrictions that create freedom. The prohibitions of Sabbath observance mirror Saturn's bindings, yet both lead to transformation through limitation. This Saturnian principle operates on 3 distinct levels: physical plane, cessation of work; bodily rest, social reorganization; psychological plane, release from normal cognitive patterns, integration of experience; contemplative space, spiritual plane, connection to eternal principles; experience of timelessness, unity of being. Modern research has revealed something remarkable about Saturn, its north polar hexagon, a perfectly geometric storm system that has persisted for decades. This 6-sided figure, unknown to the ancients, seems to eerily prefigure the concept of sacred geometry and divine limitation. Like the Sabbath, it represents order emerging from chaos through the principle of boundary setting. The dark wisdom of Saturn becomes clear here. Even its traditionally malefic qualities serve this pattern. Its slowness becomes steadiness, its coldness becomes clarity, its distance becomes perspective. The black star provides the darkness necessary for other stars to become visible, just as the Sabbath's restrictions create the space necessary for spiritual illumination. This Saturnian Sabbath association introduced something unprecedented into human consciousness: cyclical sacred time that is also historical. Unlike purely cyclical pagan time or purely linear secular time, the Sabbath creates a spiral pattern, returning weekly while advancing forward. This is reflected in Saturn's own motion, regular yet progressive, binding yet liberating. In medieval astrology, Saturn was believed to be the abode of the devil. This line from Jung's Ion reveals something extraordinary: how humanity's first teacher became its greatest adversary. The transformation of Saturn from wise old god to prince of darkness might be one of the most fascinating stories ever told. And believe me, this gets weird. Let's start with the darkness. Saturn was already the black star in ancient Rome, but this wasn't evil darkness. This was the darkness of fertile soil, pregnant with life, the darkness of deep wisdom, where philosophers find truth, the necessary darkness that lets us see other stars. See, the ancients understood something we forgot. Not all darkness is malevolent. But then something changed. In medieval astrology, Saturn became the greater malefic. Think about these attributes for a second. Lord of lead, ruler of winter, master of restriction. They called it cold and dry, heavy and slow, the planet of caves and depths and death itself. The same qualities that once marked it as a god of wisdom became signs of its diabolic nature. The parallels are almost too perfect. Saturn was traditionally bound in wool at his temple, released only during Saturnalia. The devil? Bound in chains, periodically released to test humanity. Saturn had an underground treasury beneath its temple. The devil got an underground kingdom. The grain god's harvest sickle became death's soul-reaping scythe. It's like watching a photo negative develop. Everything inverted, but preserving the exact same pattern. And here's where it gets truly interesting. Medieval astrologers assigned Saturn two signs: Capricorn, the devil's goat, and Aquarius, the revolutionary water-bearer. Think about that paradox. The most restrictive planet rules both the sign of material bondage and the sign of spiritual liberation. Just like Saturn himself was both bound god and liberator, both tyrant and teacher. The binding motif goes deeper than you might think. Saturn binds time itself, gives it structure, meaning, limits. That's what scared people most about Saturn, its power to set boundaries, to say this far and no further. The ultimate boundary setter, the cosmic no. The agricultural connection reveals even more. Saturn taught humanity to farm, gave us civilization itself according to Roman legend. But with civilization came rules, boundaries, limitations, freedom traded for security. No wonder this wise but severe teacher got recast as humanity's adversary. We never forgive those who show us our limits. Consider the chthonic aspect, everything underground. Saturn's treasury became hell's furnaces. The wealth hidden in Earth's depths became hell's molten gold. The wisdom buried in darkness became forbidden knowledge. Same symbols, different moral valence. Even Saturn's position as the furthest visible planet played into this. The edge of the known universe became the edge of divine grace. The medieval mind did something incredible with Saturn. It split it in two. The good qualities ascended to God. The bad ones descended to Satan, but they couldn't fully separate them. Think about it. Both God and devil deal in justice. Both test humanity. Both set boundaries. The shadow of Saturn falls across them both. Look at medieval art. Satan often appears with the same attributes as Saturn: the sickle, the aged face, the binding chains. And get this, just as Saturn devoured his children, medieval depictions of hell always show Satan devouring sinners. The imagery is nearly identical. It's like they couldn't quite let go of the old god, even while demonizing him. Time itself becomes a battleground in this transformation. Saturn's role as timekeeper splits. God gets eternity, Satan gets temporality. The timeless golden age of Saturn becomes both the lost Eden and the corrupt world we're stuck in. Past perfection, present corruption. Pure Saturn symbolism turned into Christian cosmology. But it gets personal. Medieval mystics and magicians never fully bought this split. In their grimoires and secret texts, Saturn remained something else, a force beyond good and evil. They saw what the church couldn't admit. You can't have creation without limitation. Can't have light without shadow. Can't have God without Saturn. The alchemists went even further. Their lead of the wise, Saturn's metal, was considered the key to transformation. The heaviest, darkest, most satanic substance contained the seed of gold. The deepest darkness held the highest light. Sound familiar? It should. It's the same paradox we started with, Saturn as both imprisoner and liberator. Consider the philosophical implications. Saturn represents necessity, the hard limits of existence itself. By demonizing Saturn, medieval Christianity was trying to make necessity itself evil. But necessity can't be evil. It's what makes existence possible. That's what the magicians and mystics understood. That's what we're finally starting to understand again. And here we arrive at something profound. The whole edifice of modern consciousness is built on how we handle Saturn's legacy. Think about it. Every time we rage against limitation, every time we seek unlimited growth, Every time we dream of transhumanist immortality, we're acting out this ancient drama of Saturn's demonization. But there's a price for demonizing necessity. When you make Saturn into Satan, you just go blind to limitations. That's exactly what's happening in our world right now. We've convinced ourselves that all limits are evil, all boundaries are oppression, all necessity is tyranny, a kind of Saturn as Satan thinking. The occult traditions saw this coming. That's why they preserved a different understanding of Saturn. In Kabbalah, Saturn rules Bina, understanding, the cosmic womb where limitation creates form. In Hermeticism, Saturn is the first teacher, harsh but necessary. Even in astrology, Saturn's difficulties are seen as initiations, not punishments. These traditions remember what Christianity tried to forget. The devil is not the enemy of creation. He's the darkness that makes the stars visible. Let's get really heretical for a moment. What if Satan isn't Saturn's corruption, but Saturn's preservation? What if the medieval devil, with all his tests and trials and limitations, is actually keeping alive something essential that orthodox religion couldn't accept? The necessity of necessity itself. Modern physics tells us something remarkable. Without the limitations of light speed, without the boundaries of quantum uncertainty, without the restrictions of thermodynamics, reality itself couldn't exist. Structure needs limitation. Creation needs boundaries. The universe needs Saturn, and so do we. Every time we accept a limit, work within constraints, or find freedom through discipline, we're channeling the old Saturn, the one before the fall. Every time we turn restriction into creativity, necessity into wisdom, limitation into form, we're reversing the medieval split that turned the cosmic teacher into the cosmic adversary. Both Saturn and Ialdabaoth, the Demiurge and Highest Archon, have lions' faces. Jung drops this bombshell in Ion almost casually, but there's nothing casual about this connection. We're looking at one of the most controversial transformations in religious history, how the Jewish god became the Gnostic Demiurge, and how both connect back to Saturn. Let's start with something strange. Why a lion's face? In Jung's source texts, Ialdabaoth is described as a being with the face of a lion, radiating power but breathing fire and fury. Saturn too was associated with the lion, particularly in Mithraic mysteries, where he's depicted as the Leontocephalus, lion-headed god of time. This is a continuation. The Gnostics looked at Saturn's qualities, limiting, binding, world-ordering, and saw something revelatory. These same qualities belong to their Demiurge, the cosmic architect who built the material universe. Ialdabaoth, they called him, the child who thought he was father, the creator who forgot he was created. Here's where it gets controversial. The Gnostics identified Ialdabaoth with the God of the Old Testament. Think about it. A powerful being who creates through limitation, who sets boundaries, who demands obedience, who rules through law. It's the same Saturn energy. But the Gnostics added a twist. Their Ialdabaoth was blind to the higher reality above him. Just as Saturn, the furthest visible planet, marked the boundary of the visible cosmos, Ialdabaoth marked the boundary of material creation. Both were cosmic gatekeepers who mistook the gate for the whole universe. Consider what the Gnostics were really saying. They took Saturn's role as divine limiter and pushed it to its logical conclusion. If limitation creates the material world, then the god of limitation must be the god of materiality itself. Ialdabaoth is what happens when Saturn's power becomes self-enclosed, when the boundary setter forgets there's anything beyond his boundaries. The texts describe Ialdabaoth declaring, "I am God and there is no other." It's Saturn's energy turned inward, the cosmic limiter becoming cosmically limited. It's like a perfect ironic tragedy. The very power that allows creation to exist becomes trapped in its own creation. And here's where the lion symbolism becomes crucial. Lions were seen as solar animals, creatures of light and power. But Ialdabaoth's lion face is described as consuming fire, destructive rather than illuminating. Saturn's coldness transformed into burning restriction, the same shift we saw with the devil, but pushed even further. The Gnostic texts give Ialdabaoth other names that reveal this Saturnian connection. They call him Samael, the blind god, Saklas, the foolish one. Each name points to the same idea: Cosmic power without cosmic wisdom. Saturn's strength without Saturn's insight. The container mistaking itself for the content. This is heavy stuff, I know, but it gets even deeper, because Ialdabaoth creates archons, cosmic rulers who help him govern reality. 7 of them. Remember Saturn's sevenfold pattern? It's still here, but now it's become a hierarchy of limitation, a cosmic prison system. The same energy that once marked sacred time now marks the boundaries of our cosmic cage. But here's what really haunts me about this interpretation. It perfectly explains why Saturn gets demonized and deified in different traditions, because Ialdabaoth is both creator and captor, cosmic architect and cosmic prison warden, necessary force and necessary evil. Sound familiar? It's the same paradox we've been tracking since the beginning. What's really being described in these Gnostic texts is the moment consciousness becomes self-conscious. Think about it. Ialdabaoth represents the mind becoming aware of itself but forgetting its source. That's exactly what Saturn energy does. It creates boundaries that allow existence, but can also trap us within those boundaries. The Gnostics were describing something they saw in human consciousness itself. Every time we mistake the map for the territory, the symbol for the reality, the ego for the self, we're reenacting Ialdabaoth's error. We're doing what Saturn energy always risks doing, turning necessary limitation into unnecessary imprisonment. But there's hope in this vision too, because in the Gnostic stories, Ialdabaoth eventually realizes he's not the highest god. The limiter discovers his own limitations, and in that moment of recognition, limitation itself becomes a path to liberation. The prison becomes a crucible. This is why the Gnostics preserved this teaching despite persecution. They saw that understanding Ialdabaoth, understanding how Saturn energy can become both creative and restrictive, was key to spiritual awakening. You had to see the boundaries to move beyond them. And here's the ultimate paradox. In the end, Ialdabaoth's realm of matter becomes necessary for the spirit to know itself, just as Saturn's limitations are necessary for existence itself. The cosmic prison turns out to be a cosmic womb. The blind god serves the purposes of a higher vision. Let's talk about the step between Ialdabaoth and pure divinity, the demiurge proper, not just the blind god of the Gnostics, but the cosmic craftsman of Plato, the divine architect who shapes matter according to eternal patterns. This is Saturn energy in its most philosophical form. In Plato's Timaeus, the demiurge is described as the ordering force that transforms chaos into cosmos. Working with mathematical principles, he shapes reality according to divine ideas. Also what Saturn does. Saturn creates order through limitation, meaning through boundary setting. But unlike Ialdabaoth, who thinks he's the highest god, the Platonic demiurge knows he's working from a higher template. He's not blind. He's more like a cosmic craftsman, looking at eternal forms and recreating them in matter, a more positive expression of the Saturnian energy. Think about what this means. The same force that appears demonic in some traditions, blind in others, becomes divine craftsmanship here. The demiurge uses limitation not to imprison but to create, turning the infinite possibilities of chaos into the actual forms of cosmos. And there's something else in the texts that's fascinating. The demiurge works with what the Greeks called chora, the receptive space that exists between being and non-being. It's described as a kind of cosmic womb, a space of pure potential. Again, pure Saturn symbolism, the container that makes content possible. What the demiurge is really doing is giving form to formless potential. And isn't that exactly what Saturn does? Whether we're talking about the physical planet's rings containing space, or time itself containing eternity, or law containing chaos, it's all the same principle. Form-shaping void. The Neoplatonists took this even further. For them, the demiurge was the divine mind itself, thinking the universe into being. Each limitation becomes a thought, each boundary a divine idea. Matter itself becomes frozen thought. Again, essentially Saturn, but seen from above rather than below. Here's what keeps me up at night. What if they were right? What if limitation isn't just a cosmic prison or a divine craft, but the very nature of thought itself? Think about it. You can't have a thought without giving it form, can't have meaning without structure. can't have intelligence without boundaries. The Demiurge is shaping matter, but more importantly, he's making mind possible. But there's a price for this creation through limitation. The Demiurge can only create imperfect copies of perfect forms. His creations are always bound by time, space, matter, by limitation itself. It's like a cosmic catch-22. Limitation makes creation possible, but also ensures that creation will always be limited. The ancient texts tell us the Demiurge creates using geometric patterns, circles, triangles, ratios, numbers. Look at Saturn's hexagonal storm. Look at its perfect rings. Look at the mathematical precision of its orbit. The planet itself reflects the same cosmic architect's methods. As above, so below. And now we arrive at something truly mind-bending. In certain Hermetic texts, the Demiurge isn't just creating through divine mathematics. He is divine mathematics, the living embodiment of sacred geometry, cosmic ratio, divine proportion. Every number is one of his thoughts. Every form is one of his dreams. Remember how Saturn rules lead in alchemy, the heaviest, most material metal? Well, the Demiurge works similarly, taking the heavy matter of potential and transmuting it through divine proportion. The alchemists understood this. Their entire art was based on following the Demiurge's methods, turning limitation itself into a path of transformation. But here's the real mystery. The Demiurge isn't the highest god in these systems, just like Saturn isn't the furthest planet in our current understanding. There's always something beyond the boundary, always another level of reality outside the cosmic architect's workshop. This creates a fractal hierarchy. Ialdabaoth is the blind craftsman, the Demiurge is the seeing craftsman, and above both is the ineffable source they're working from. Like a cosmic game of telephone, each level translating infinity into increasingly dense forms of limitation. The Hermeticists put it this way: God geometrizes, but it's the Demiurge who holds the compass. He's the active principle, the measurer, the shaper. Saturn energy as creative necessity rather than blind restriction or demonic imprisonment. Think about the title itself for a moment. Highest Archon, the supreme ruler, the ultimate authority. We're dealing with Saturn energy at its most concentrated, most intense, and here's where all our previous threads start coming together into something extraordinary. In the esoteric traditions, the highest Archon represents the point where authority meets its own limit, where cosmic law confronts the lawgiver, where Saturn's principle of limitation finally turns back on itself. This is power facing its own reflection in the cosmic mirror. The texts describe the highest Archon as dwelling in the eighth heaven, just beyond the 7 planetary spheres. Again, Saturn's symbolism persists. Just as Saturn marked the boundary of the visible planets, the highest Archon marks the boundary between the material and spiritual cosmos. But here's where it gets weird. The highest Archon is a threshold guardian, standing at the boundary between created and uncreated reality. He's what happens when Saturn's principle of limitation reaches its logical endpoint, the ultimate gatekeeper of cosmic order. When Jung speaks of Saturn and Ialdabaoth sharing the face of a lion, he's pointing to something ancient and terrifying. The lion is the mark of divine power turned fierce, protective, consuming. Think about it. A solar symbol attached to the darkest planet. A symbol of fire given to the coldest sphere. That's some tasty cosmic irony. Let's look at what the texts actually say. In the Gnostic descriptions, this lion face is terrifying. It breathes fire, it consumes, it guards. Classic threshold guardian imagery. But why a lion? Why this specific symbol for cosmic authority? The answer lies in ancient astrology. The lion, Leo, is the house of the sun. By giving Saturn a lion's face, the ancients were suggesting something profound, the dark planet wearing a mask of light, the limiter disguised as the illuminator, cold Saturn pretending to be the burning sun. This connects directly to the ancient temple imagery. Lion-headed gods guarded sacred spaces. They marked boundaries between sacred and profane like Saturn. But they did it with solar power, with consuming fire. It's like the universe has a sense of humor. The cosmic prison guard wears the face of freedom. The Mithraic mysteries take this even further. Their lion-headed god, often identified with Saturn, is shown wrapped in the coils of a serpent. Time and eternity in one image. The boundary setter bound by his own boundaries. The limiter limited. Origin elicits from the diagram of Celsus that Michael, the first angel of the Creator, has the shape of a lion. There it is again, that lion face. But now we're not talking about dark Saturn or blind Ialdabaoth. We're talking about the commander of the heavenly hosts, the warrior angel, the supreme defender of divine order. This is Saturn's power transformed into pure celestial authority. Think about Michael's roles. Weigher of souls, guardian of the threshold, enforcer of divine law. Sound familiar? It should. Saturnian spirit again, but now it's wielding a flaming sword instead of a harvester's sickle. And some would say it almost feels like he's pointing that flaming sword to himself. What's fascinating is how Michael stands in relation to divine power. He's not God, but God's executor. Not the law itself, but the law's enforcer. Just as Saturn isn't the source of limit, but limit's administrator. The parallels are perfect. Too perfect to be coincidence. The texts tell us Michael occupies a specific position in heaven, the cosmic north. Now get this, Saturn rules Capricorn, the northernmost sign. The same direction, the same function, the same fundamental energy. Whether you're looking at planets, angels, or archons, the pattern holds. But here's where it gets really interesting. Michael is traditionally depicted standing on a dragon or demon. Just like Saturn is bound except during Saturnalia. Just like the highest Archon contains the lower powers. It's always the same story. Divine authority restraining chaos through limitation. Even Michael's name holds a clue. Who is like God? That's what it means. It's a question and a declaration, a boundary between divine and created being, Saturnian principle expressed through angelic function. The Demiurge of the Nayscenes is a fiery god, the fourth by number. According to the teachings of Apelles, there was a third god who spoke to Moses, a fiery one, and there was also a fourth, the author of evil. Here's where Saturn's cold nature meets its opposite, and somehow becomes it. Think about this paradox. The coldest planet becomes associated with consuming fire. The star that gives the least light becomes the burning judge. What's going on here? Let's look deeper. In the ancient world, there were two kinds of fire, the nurturing fire of the hearth and the consuming fire of judgment. Saturn's fire is definitely the second kind. It's the fire that tests, that purifies, that reduces everything to its essence. Cold fire, if you can imagine such a thing. The Nayscenes knew that by making their demiurge a fiery god, they weren't contradicting Saturn's cold nature, but were completing it. Because what does fire do? It sets boundaries, it transforms through limitation, it reduces multiplicity to unity, Saturnian polarity, and that number 4 keeps appearing. Fourth god, fourth by number. Remember, 4 is the number of manifestation, of matter, of limit itself. Saturn as the fourth fiery god is Saturn as the power that brings divine fire down into material form. The cosmic architect using fire as his tool. But here's the real mystery. This fiery aspect connects Saturn directly to Moses and Sinai, the burning bush, the fire on the mountain, the consuming presence that gives divine law. Again and again, when divine limitation appears, it appears as fire. According to the teachings of Apelles, there was a third god who spoke to Moses, a fiery one, and there was also a fourth, the author of evil. This line from Jung's Aeon opens up one of the most powerful transformations of Saturn's power. Its manifestation through the great lawgiver himself. Let me show you something extraordinary about Moses that connects directly to our Saturnian mystery. Think about his life pattern. Found in water, fluid, formless, raised in structure, Pharaoh's house, exiled to the desert, Saturn's wasteland, and finally becoming the vessel of divine limitation, the law. It's like watching Saturn's principle incarnate in a human form. But it gets deeper. The texts tell us about a fiery god who spoke to Moses. This wasn't just any divine fire. This was Saturn's fire transformed into divine law. Remember how we talked about Saturn's cold fire? Here it manifests as the burning bush, a fire that illuminates but doesn't consume. Perfect metaphor for limiting power that creates rather than destroys. Consider the scene at Sinai. The mountain was wrapped in darkness and fire, classic Saturn imagery. But now something new happens. The voice that speaks from the consuming flame doesn't consume. Divine limitation, law, becomes a form of liberation, Saturn energy speaking Hebrew, instead of binding with wool. Then Moses comes down from the mountain with his face shining, literally radiating limitation if you think about it. He has to veil his face, just like Saturn was traditionally depicted as veiled. The parallel is almost too perfect, both figures mediating between ordinary reality and divine limitation, both having to mask their full power. The Jewish mystical tradition picks up on this. They say Moses spoke with a speech impediment, a limitation of expression. Yet this very limitation made him the perfect vessel for divine law. Just as Saturn's restrictions create the possibility of meaning, Moses' verbal boundary became the channel for divine word. Think about that paradox, limitation becoming the vehicle of ultimate expression. Look at how Moses functions in the story. He's constantly setting boundaries, defining limits, creating structure from chaos. The Ten Commandments are pure Saturn principle, limitation as the foundation of freedom. But he does something else too. He establishes time itself through the calendar, the festivals, the rhythms of sacred life. Again, pure Saturn function. But there's something even more profound in Moses' story. Think about the staff, his symbol of authority. What does it do? It divides the sea, sets boundaries against enemies, brings forth water from stone. These are Saturn functions, but here's the twist. The staff itself was first a serpent, the boundless transformed into the tool of boundary setting. And what about that moment at the burning bush? Take off your shoes, the voice says. It's about establishing proper boundaries between sacred and profane. But look closer. Moses asks for the divine name, and what does he get? I am that I am. The ultimate statement of self-limitation. God defining himself through boundaries. It's Saturn. The wilderness journey itself is pure Saturn initiation. 40 years, a number of trials and testing. The people learn freedom through limitation. Manna, limited food. The tabernacle, limited sacred space. The law, limited behavior. Each restriction paradoxically creates more possibilities. Just like Saturn's rings don't imprison the planet, they define it. Consider the deeper pattern here. Moses leads the people from Mitzrayim, literally narrow places in Hebrew, through the wilderness to the promised land. But what's fascinating is that they trade one form of limitation for another. Egyptian slavery for divine law, forced restriction for chosen limitation. It's Saturn's power being transformed, not eliminated. The Kabbalah sees something remarkable in Moses. They associate him with the Sephira Da'at, hidden knowledge. The invisible boundary between the divine and human dimensions. Just as Saturn marked the boundary of the visible cosmos, Moses marks the boundary of visible divinity. He can see God's back, but not God's face. A perfect metaphor for limited human consciousness encountering the unlimited. Let's go deeper into what Moses represents in terms of consciousness transformation. The texts tell us he was heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. Think about that metaphor. The lawgiver himself bound by the law of limited speech. It's almost like a cosmic joke. Saturn's limitation inscribed into the very voice that would proclaim divine law. But here's where it gets profound. Moses' encounters with divinity follow a clear Saturn pattern. Darkness, limitation, transformation. At the burning bush, he covers his face. On Sinai, he enters the dark cloud. Even his greatest moment, seeing God's back, is defined by what he cannot see. Each limitation becomes an initiation. The rabbis tell us something fascinating. Moses' prophecy was different from all others because he saw through a clear lens rather than a dim one. But even this clarity was a form of limitation. It separated him from ordinary human consciousness. He became, in a sense, Saturn's perfect priest, the one who could bear pure limitation without breaking. Consider his role with the golden calf. When he breaks the tablets, he's not just angry. He's enacting a profound truth about limitation. The first tablets, written by God, were too unlimited for human consciousness. The second tablets, carved by Moses himself, represent divine limitation accommodating itself to human limits, pure Saturn wisdom. And this points to something even deeper. Moses becomes what the Kabbalists call a mashal, a living metaphor for how consciousness itself develops. Through limitation, law; through darkness, exile; through boundaries, commandments, consciousness learns to contain divine light without shattering. The desert wandering shows this process in action. Every crisis follows the same pattern. Chaos threatens, boundaries are established, new consciousness emerges. The people complain about water. Moses strikes the rock. Limitation creates flow. They want meat. Quails come, but with restrictions. They need direction. The cloud and fire appear, but only one day's journey at a time. But perhaps most profoundly, Moses himself becomes the ultimate example of Saturn's greatest teaching, that even our limitations are pathways to liberation. He never enters the promised land, his final and perhaps most significant limitation. Yet tradition says he sees it all, understands it all, from Mount Nebo. His limitation becomes his transcendence. Let's unpack something extraordinary about the divine name itself. When Moses asks for God's name at the burning bush, he receives what might be the most Saturnian answer possible. I am that I am, or in Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Think about what this means. The infinite defining itself through self-limitation. Pure Saturn principle operating at the highest level, but it gets deeper. The name Yahweh itself becomes the ultimate boundary. Too sacred to pronounce, too holy to write fully. The Jews replace it with Hashem, the name, or Adonai, Lord. Eyes a profound understanding of how the unlimited can only be approached through limitation. The unpronounceable name becomes a perfect Saturn gate, a boundary that both prohibits and enables relationship. Look at how Yahweh operates in the texts. He's constantly setting boundaries between light and darkness, waters above and below, holy and profane. But these are creative acts. Just as Saturn's rings don't just limit the planet, but define its beauty, divine limitation creates the possibility of meaning. Here's where it gets really interesting. Yahweh has two main aspects in the Old Testament, the God of justice and the God of mercy. Pure Saturn duality, the limiting, restricting force and the force that knows when to suspend those very limitations. Think about the Sabbath laws being broken to save life. It's Saturn teaching us that even boundaries need boundaries. The prophets understood something profound about this. When they speak of Yahweh, they often use imagery straight out of Saturn's playbook. The consuming fire, the dark cloud, the voice from the whirlwind. Each time divine power manifests through limitation rather than unlimited force. Consider how Yahweh reveals himself, always partially, always through veils. To Moses, only his back, never his face. To Elijah, not in fire or earthquake, but in the still small voice, divine power limiting itself to a whisper. To Isaiah, through smoke and seraphim that both reveal and conceal. It's Saturn's pattern of revelation through restriction playing out at the divine level. The temple itself was built on this principle. The Holy of Holies, the most sacred space, was also the most restricted. Only one person once a year could enter. Pure Saturn logic. The highest truth requires the strongest boundaries. But here's the paradox. This very restriction created the possibility of divine presence. The limits didn't imprison God. They made relationship with God possible. And look at the prophetic understanding of time. Yahweh is described as both Ancient of Days, pure Saturn title, and Lord of the Future. He exists beyond time while operating within it, just as Saturn both limits time through its orbit and transcends it as the timekeeper. The prophet Ezekiel even sees him on a sapphire throne, the same blue-black color associated with Saturn's cold light. The Kabbalah goes even further. They say the first act of creation was tzimtzum, divine self-contraction. God had to limit himself to make space for creation. Think about that. The first creative act wasn't expansion, but limitation. Saturn again. The infinite limiting itself to birth finite reality. The divine name Yahweh has the same root as to be or to become. It suggests that God's essence is the transformation of possibility into actuality. Exactly what Saturn does. Each divine limitation reveals God's power in new ways. The whole sacrificial system was built on this understanding: sacred space, sacred time, sacred actions, all carefully bounded. But these were technologies for relating to the unlimited through deliberately chosen limits. Saturn's wisdom encoded in ritual form. The mystics discovered something revolutionary about divine names. When they meditated on Yahweh, they found it contained all possibilities, but only because it was bounded by specific letters in a specific order. Like Saturn's rings, the limitation created the power. The restriction enabled the infinite to become accessible. Jewish tradition tells us there are 70 names of God. Why 70? Think about it. 7 is Saturn's number, and 10 represents completion. 70 becomes the number of divine limitation expressing itself completely. Each name shows a different face of how the unlimited chooses to become knowable through limits. But there's something even more incredible here. The Tetragrammaton of Yahweh has 4 letters, matching the 4 worlds of Kabbalah: Atziluth, emanation; Beriah, creation; Yetzirah, formation; and Asiya, action. Each world represents divine energy becoming progressively more limited, more Saturnian, until it can manifest in material reality. Look at the priestly blessings. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. The word for keep, Yishmarika, shares its root with shamar, to guard, to set boundaries. Divine blessing comes through divine limitation. The infinite preserves us through sacred restrictions. This reaches its peak in the concept of tzimtzum I mentioned earlier. The Lurianic Kabbalists saw that divine limitation was the first creative act and an ongoing process. God continuously limits himself to make space for creation, for free will, for human consciousness. Saturn's principle operates at the heart of reality. Saturn is a black star, anciently reputed a Maleficus. Jung cites Bouche Leclerc's fascinating catalogue of Saturn's creatures: dragons, serpents, scorpions, vipers, foxes, cats, mice, nocturnal birds, everything that moves in darkness, everything that understands limitation. But let's go deeper into this blackness. This isn't the void black of empty space. This is the fertile black of soil, the mysterious black of initiation chambers, the transformative black of the alchemical nigredo. When the ancients called Saturn the black star, they were describing its dim light and naming its function. Think about it. Saturn's light is the dimmest of all visible planets, but this very dimness creates something crucial: the ability to see other stars. Just as the darkness of night reveals the cosmos, Saturn's darkness reveals deeper patterns of meaning. The malefic becomes the revealer. The texts tell us something fascinating about Saturn's animals. They're all creatures of boundary zones: serpents that move between surface and depth, nocturnal birds that navigate darkness, cats that walk between wild and domestic. Each one embodies Saturn's primary function, marking and crossing boundaries. Here's something we haven't explored yet. The color black had a specific technical meaning in ancient astrology. A black planet was considered burnt by proximity to the sun. Yet Saturn, furthest from the sun, was still called black. This paradox reveals something crucial about how the ancients understood darkness itself. Medieval sources tell us Saturn's blackness was atra, not just the absence of light, but a positive quality, like the black of obsidian or jet. This was linked to its role in melancholia, what we'd now call depression. But the medievals saw melancholia differently, as a necessary darkness, a gestation period where wisdom grows. Consider Saturn's connection to graphite and carbon, the black elements that form both the softest pencil lead and the hardest diamond. Pure Saturn symbolism in material form. Even modern physics tells us something remarkable about black. It absorbs all wavelengths of light, making it the ultimate transformer of energy. The Sabaeans of Haran took this further. They performed their Saturn rituals in deep caves wearing black robes using black stones. For them, Saturn's blackness was potential, the darkness before revelation. Think about how your eyes have to adjust to darkness before you can see the stars. It gets really interesting. In certain Hermetic texts, Saturn is called Sol Niger, the black sun. Not the opposite of the sun, but the sun's hidden face, the light that illuminates the deepest parts of matter itself, the consciousness that operates in dreams and shadows. The esoteric alchemists saw something specific in this black sun imagery that no one else caught. In their texts, the blackening phase, Negredo, was always depicted as a black crow or raven, Saturn's birds. But unlike the Church, they saw this blackness as the beginning of wisdom, not its absence. The blackbird wasn't death, but gestation. There's an encrypted text from an anonymous Arabian alchemist that puts it perfectly. In Saturn's darkness, all colors hide. Think about that chemically. Black contains all pigments. Every possibility exists in the prima materia, the black earth, before differentiation. Saturn's darkness isn't emptiness, Ayet's fullness beyond our ability to distinguish. We find an echo of this in Jewish mysticism's concept of tohu, the primordial darkness before creation, not chaos, but hyper-dense potential. The darkness had to come first because only darkness can contain all possibilities without destroying them through premature manifestation. Sound familiar? It's Saturn's function again, but seen from the inside. The Ophites, those serpent-venerating Gnostics, took this to its logical conclusion. They claimed the true light was black light, the consciousness that sees in darkness. For them, Saturn wasn't the furthest planet, but the deepest one, governing not the outer boundary, but the inner core of reality. Dragons, serpents, scorpions, vipères, renards, chats et souris, oiseaux nocturnes et autres engins sournoises sont le lot de Saturne, says Bouche Leclerc. Let's unpack what it meant for Saturn to become the great malefic, because this is where something extraordinary happens to the black star's power. Medieval astrology didn't just call Saturn malefic, they called it the greater malefic. Why greater? Because unlike Mars, the lesser malefic, Saturn's harmful influence was seen as cold, calculating, and inevitable. Not the quick slash of Mars, but the slow strangulation of time itself. Each of Saturn's animals earned its place in this malefic menagerie for a specific reason. Dragons guard hordes. Saturn limits access to wealth. Serpents shed their skin. Saturn rules death and renewal. Scorpions carry their armor. Saturn teaches protection through limitation. Every creature reveals another face of necessary evil. The Suris, mice and rats, are particularly interesting. They're liminal creatures, living between the human world and the wilderness. They carry plague, yes, but they also warn of architectural weakness. Pure Saturn function, revealing structural flaws through apparent destruction. But what the medievals missed was hiding in plain sight. Every one of these evil creatures serves a crucial ecological function. Even the plague-bearing rat is a keystone species, just as Saturn's apparently malefic influence serves a deeper cosmic purpose. The medieval mind couldn't hold this paradox. That necessary evil might just be necessity misunderstood. Here's where Saturn's symbolism takes its strangest turn. Remarkably enough, Jung tells us, Saturn's animals also include the ass, which on that account was rated a theriomorphic form of the Jewish god. Let's follow this bizarre connection. The evidence appears on the Palatine Hill, a famous piece of graffiti showing a crucified figure with an ass's head. Pure anti-Jewish propaganda, but accidentally preserving something older, because the ass wasn't always a symbol of stubbornness or stupidity. It was originally sacred. Think about the ass's actual nature: patient, enduring, able to carry immense burdens, able to survive in the harshest conditions, able to see in the dark. Sound familiar? These are Saturn's qualities transformed into animal form, the beast that bears necessity's weight. In Egypt, it gets even weirder. The ass begins as an attribute of the sun god, think light-bearing, burden-bearing, but later it becomes associated with Set, lord of the desert and foreigners' lands, the boundary crosser, the limit setter, Saturn's territory again. Tertullian has to defend against the rumor that we do homage only to an ass. But what if the accusers were accidentally right? What if the ass, like Saturn, represents something essential about divinity? its ability to limit itself, to bear burdens, to appear humble while carrying immense power. Here's what no one talks about. Nietzsche's Zarathustra has a crucial scene called the Ass Festival, where the higher men worship an ass. Everyone treats it as satire, but think twice, because this ass has distinctly Saturnian characteristics. This isn't just any ass, it's an ass that says yea, IA in German, to everything, including limitation, including suffering, including necessity. It's Saturn's acceptance of boundary and burden, transformed into a new kind of sacred beast. But Nietzsche takes it further. His ass becomes a parody of religious transformation, except the parody reveals the truth. The higher men discover that you can't overcome limitation without first embracing it. Can't transcend boundaries without first bearing their weight. Condensed Saturn soul in donkey form. Consider the timing. This scene happens near the end of the book, after midnight, Saturn's hour. The higher men have learned to laugh, but now they need to learn something harder: how to bear reality's full weight. Enter the ass, the beast that bears burdens with neither complaint nor pride. Zarathustra sees something the others miss. This ass worship is both a relapse into old religion and a necessary step towards something new, just as Saturn's limitations are both a prison and a pathway. The ass becomes what Nietzsche elsewhere calls the spirit of gravity, necessity itself made flesh. Sabaoth, the seventh Archon, has the form of an ass. This line from Jung's sources reveals something extraordinary. The moment when Saturn's ass symbolism enters the heavenly hierarchy itself, the seventh Archon, ruling the seventh sphere, Saturn's domain, appears as the beast of burden. But look at the name itself. Sabaoth means of hosts or of armies. This is divine authority. It is martial power, choosing to appear in its most humble form. Like Saturn veiled, like divinity limited, the Lord of Armies takes the shape of a work animal. In certain Gnostic texts, Sabaoth rebels against his father Ialdabaoth. Why? Because he recognizes a higher truth above the material universe. The ass-headed Archon is the first to understand that limitation isn't the highest principle. The border guard questions the border. The very force that maintains cosmic order, Saturn's force, becomes the first to recognize its own limits. Pure divine paradox. The keeper of boundaries discovers the boundary of boundaries. The ass-headed god becomes the god who sees beyond. In Jung's exploration of the Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic text from the 3rd century, we encounter a startling image. Jesus and his spiritual twin, embracing and becoming one. This double aspect of Christ takes us into the heart of Saturn's shadow, the mysterious figure of Satanael. Satanael, in Gnostic lore, is the elder son of God, the demiurge who shapes the material world. He is the cosmic artisan, the shaper of forms, a clear parallel to Saturn's role as the Lord of Manifestation. But Satanael is also the author of evil, the force of cosmic limitation turned malevolent. He is the dark twin of Christ, the younger son who represents the liberating power of divine spirit. This duality reflects Saturn's own ambivalence as both world shaper and world limiter. Satanael embodies the shadow side of Saturn's creative power, the tendency of structure to become imprisonment, of form to become a tomb for the formless. He is the malefic Saturn taken to its ultimate extreme. Yet the Pistis Sophia suggests that this duality is not ultimate. In the embrace of Christ and his twin, a higher unity is revealed. The light and the shadow, the liberating spirit and the limiting form, are recognized as complementary aspects of a single divine reality. Satanael's power is not abolished but transformed, integrated into the wholeness of divine being. This points to the deepest mystery of the Saturnian archetype, the reconciliation of opposites. Saturn, as we have seen, is a god of polarities, light and darkness, creation and dissolution, liberation and limitation. In figures like Satanael, these polarities reach their point of maximum tension. But it is precisely in this tension that the potential for a higher synthesis emerges. The Gnostic doctrine of the two sons of God, Christ and the devil, can be seen as an attempt to enact the Saturnian paradox. It's a mythic expression of the psyche's need to confront and integrate its own darkness, to reckon with the shadow that haunts the boundaries of the self. In astrological terms, Saturnael can be understood as the extreme point of Saturn's detriment in Leo, the sign of solar light and individual self-expression. Here, Saturn's contractive power turns tyrannical, seeking to dominate and suppress the creative fire of the spirit. But it is also here, in the heart of the sun's domain, that Saturn's own transformation becomes possible, a theme reflected in the alchemical idea of the black sun that dwells at the core of primal matter. The mystery of Saturnael thus points us back to the recurring motif of Saturn's dual nature as adversary and ally, as the darkness that paradoxically illuminates. It is only by confronting this darkness, by embracing the shadow twin within ourselves, that we can hope to achieve the Christic state of wholeness and integration. This is the true meaning of the Saturnian initiation, not a simple victory of light over darkness, but a reconciliation of opposites, a sacred marriage of spirit and matter. It is the realization that our deepest limitations contain the seeds of our greatest liberation, that our most leaden darkness harbors the potential for the purest gold. In this sense, Saturnael is not just Christ's adversary, but his necessary complement, the dark brother whose embrace makes possible the full realization of divine sonship. He is the guardian of the threshold, the one who forces us to confront the depths of our own being before we can ascend to the heights of spiritual awakening. This is the final message of Saturn, the ultimate meaning of his long journey through the cycles of cosmic time. That the way to wholeness leads through the heart of darkness, that the path to the divine leads through the depths of the self. In embracing our own Saturnael, we open ourselves to the transformative power of the Christic spirit, the lapis philosophorum that turns base metal into gold and mortal limitation into immortal freedom. So let us not flee from Saturn's shadow, but rather meet it with courage and compassion, knowing that in its darkness lies the key to our own redemption. Let us confront Saturnael within ourselves, not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a lost brother to be reconciled and redeemed. For it is only in the crucible of this inner alchemy that the true gold of the spirit can be forged, and the lead of our mortal nature transmuted into the philosopher's stone of eternal being. Note that Satan finds the two fishes before the creation in the beginning, when the Spirit of God still brooded upon the dark face of the waters. With this cryptic observation, Jung takes us to the very origins of the cosmos, where the figure of Satan looms as a primordial presence. Satan, in Judeo-Christian tradition, is the adversary, the one who opposes the divine order. He is the rebel angel who refuses to submit to God's authority, the tempter who lures humanity away from the path of righteousness. In this sense, he represents the ultimate expression of Saturn's contractive, limiting power, the force that says no to the expansive, creative energy of the divine. But Jung's reference to the two fishes suggests a deeper, more primal role for Satan. In many ancient cosmologies, the figure of the cosmic adversary is present from the very beginning as a necessary counterpart to the creative power of the divine. This is the Zoroastrian Angra Mainyu, who opposes Ahura Mazda, the Egyptian Set, who battles Osiris, the Babylonian Tiamat, who wars against Marduk. These primordial adversaries represent the chaotic, formless potentiality that precedes and challenges the emergence of cosmic order. They are the darkness that the light must overcome, the resistance that the creative power must shape and transform. In this sense, they are not evil in a moral sense, but rather expressions of the fundamental duality that underlies manifest existence. Satan, as the ultimate adversary, can be seen as an embodiment of this primal duality. He is the darkness that defines the light, the no that gives meaning to the divine yes. His presence at the beginning, when the Spirit of God still brooded upon the dark face of the waters, suggests that he is an intrinsic part of the divine mystery, the shadow that accompanies the light from the very dawn of creation. This casts the figure of Satan in a new and startling light. He is not just the enemy of God, but in some sense a necessary aspect of the divine itself, the power of negation and limitation that makes possible the very act of creation. Just as the Kabbalists saw the divine act of Tzimtzum, the self-contraction of God, as the precondition for the emergence of the manifest world, so too can Satan be seen as the contractive power that allows the expansive energy of the divine to take form and structure. This is the deep paradox of the Saturnian archetype, the mystery that Satan embodies in his darkest and most challenging form. Saturn, as we have seen, is the lord of boundaries, the one who separates and defines, who gives shape to the formless and limit to the unlimited. In his benevolent aspect, he is the wise elder, the stern but just lawgiver, the one who teaches us the value of discipline, responsibility, and respect for limits. But in his shadow aspect, Saturn becomes the tyrant, the oppressor, the one who uses limitation and constraint as tools of domination and control. This is the Saturn that we see in figures like Ialdabaoth, the Gnostic demiurge, who creates the world as a prison for the divine spark, or in the medieval image of the devil as the one who binds souls in hell. Satan, as the ultimate embodiment of this shadow, represents the point where Saturn's power tips over into negation for its own sake, into a rejection of the very principle of creation. He is the spirit that always denies, the one who seeks to reveal the fabric of the cosmos and return it to the formless void from whence it came. Yet even in this darkest of roles, Satan remains a necessary part of the divine economy. For it is only through the overcoming of negation that affirmation finds its fullest expression, only through the resistance of matter that spirit discovers its true power. Satan is the weight that the divine must lift in order to manifest its full strength, the darkness that the light must illuminate in order to shine forth in its full glory. This is the final secret of the Saturnian path, the mystery that Satan guards at the threshold of the cosmos. To confront Saturn's shadow is to confront the fundamental duality at the heart of existence, the eternal play of light and darkness, form and formlessness, being and non-being. It is to recognize that limitation and negation are not obstacles to be overcome, but rather essential aspects of the divine mystery, sacred powers that must be honored and integrated if we are to find wholeness and completion. In this sense, Satan is not just the adversary of God, but the dark face of God himself, the left hand of the divine that performs the necessary work of dissolution and transformation. To embrace Satan is not to reject the light, but to acknowledge the darkness that dwells within the light, the shadow that gives depth and definition to the radiance of being. This is the path of the true Saturnian initiate, the one who dares to face the darkness within and without, to confront the adversary at the very heart of the cosmos. It is a path of great danger and great reward, a path that leads through the abyss of negation to the summit of affirmation, through the crucible of dissolution to the stone of eternal being. So let us not flee from the figure of Satan, but rather approach him with the courage and insight born of Saturnian wisdom. Let us recognize in his dark visage the necessary counterpart to the divine light, the shadow that makes possible the full expression of the creative power. And let us embrace the adversary within ourselves, not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a secret ally in the great work of cosmic transformation, the initiatic path that leads from the darkness of lead to the gold of illuminated consciousness. For it is only by reconciling the opposites within ourselves, by wedding the light and the darkness, the form and the formless, that we can hope to achieve the true Saturnian synthesis, the alchemical gold that is the fruit of the philosopher's stone. This is the great work that awaits us, the cosmic destiny that Saturn holds in store for those who dare to walk his winding path through the cycles of time. But the pair of brothers Heru-Ur, the older Horus, and Set are sometimes pictured as having one body with two heads. This bizarre Egyptian image unlocks something crucial about Saturn's transformations, the moment when the boundary setter meets his opposite. Unlike our previous ass symbolism, Set's connection to the ass is primal. In early Egyptian texts, the ass was a solar animal, creative power, generative force, but in Set's hands it becomes something else, the force that crosses boundaries, that brings necessary chaos, that challenges established order. Think about Set's role. He's the lord of foreign lands, of the desert of storms, everything outside the ordered world of Egypt, but, and this is crucial, Egypt couldn't exist without him. Just as the cosmos needs chaos, order needs its opposite. Set isn't evil, he's a necessary opposition. That two-headed image tells us everything. Set and Horus sharing one body, order and disorder as aspects of a single reality. Saturn again, opposition becomes a form of unity. The boundary between order and chaos turns out to be a meeting point. But here's the real mystery. Set becomes associated with Mercury. The rebellious principle becomes the principle of transformation. The ass-headed god of opposition becomes the god of wisdom. Just as Saturn's limitations, fully understood, become pathways to liberation. In the Egyptian pantheon, Sutekh, or Set, stands as a complex and often misunderstood deity. He's associated with chaos, violence, and foreigners, yet also revered as a protector of Ra on his nightly journey through the underworld. Like Saturn, Sutekh embodies the necessary yet disruptive forces that disturbs the established order. The parallels between Sutekh and Saturn are striking. Both are associated with the color red. Sutekh with the red sands of the desert, Saturn with the red star Antares in the constellation of Scorpio. Red is the color of blood, of vitality, but also of danger and destruction. It is the color of the liminal zones, where the ordered world meets the chaotic wilderness. Sutekh is often depicted as a strange chimeric creature, with a long curved snout and tall square ears. This composite form reflects his role as a god of the borderlands, the wild spaces beyond the cultivated fields of the Nile Valley. Similarly, Saturn is associated with the edges of the known world, the distant sphere that marks the boundary between cosmos and chaos. In myth, Sutekh murders his brother Osiris out of jealousy, scattering his body parts across Egypt. Yet this act of fragmentation also allows for Osiris's resurrection and transformation into the lord of the underworld. Sutekh's violence thus has a paradoxical generative aspect, much like Saturn's role as a god of both dissolution and renewal. Sutekh was also identified with the planet Mercury, further linking him to the mercurial themes explored in the previous section. As a god of the desert and foreign lands, Sutekh was seen as a master of translation and interpretation, able to navigate between different cultural realms. This mercurial fluidity aligns with Sutekh's ambivalent nature. He is a destabilizing force, yet also a necessary agent of change and growth. In the later Egyptian tradition, Sutekh became increasingly demonized, his name used as a stand-in for the evil god Apophis, the serpent of chaos who threatened to devour the sun each night. Yet even in this villainous guise, Sutekh retains his Saturnian role as a necessary adversary, a force of opposition that spurs the cycles of death and rebirth. The Sutekh-Saturn connection also evokes the alchemical process of putrefaction, the blackening stage where matter is broken down and dissolved, allowing for the emergence of new forms. Sutekh's dismemberment of Osiris mirrors the alchemist's spagyric operations, separating and recombining elements to create the philosopher's stone. In this light, Sutekh emerges as a Saturnian catalyst, a god who shatters old forms to allow for new growth. His violence is the violence of transformation, the necessary pain of shedding outdated identities. Like Saturn, he presides over the liminal spaces where the self is dissolved and reconstituted, where the boundaries between order and chaos are blurred and redefined. The Egyptian understanding of Sutekh thus adds another layer to the Saturnian archetype. He is the shadow that haunts the edges of the psyche, the repressed force that erupts into consciousness to challenge our comfortable assumptions. Yet he is also the alchemical fire that purifies and transforms, the agent of initiation that ushers us through the dark night of the soul. To grapple with Sutekh is to confront the Saturnian realm of necessity, the inexorable laws of change and decay that govern the manifest world. Yet it is also to tap into the mercurial power of regeneration, the capacity to adapt and evolve in the face of adversity. In the figure of Sutekh Saturn, we find a key to the mystery of embodied existence, the paradoxical truth that it is only by embracing dissolution that we can truly come into being. In Jung's analysis of the astrological conjunctions heralding major religious traditions, he notes a fascinating link between Saturn and Mercury. The conjunction of Jupiter and Mercury, Jung states, coincided with the rise of Islam. This celestial fusion of the king planet and the messenger god bears profound symbolic meaning. Mercury, known to the Greeks as Hermes and to the Egyptians as Thoth, embodies the archetype of the intermediary who moves between worlds, translating divine messages for mortal ears. In the Greco-Egyptian tradition, Hermes Trismegistus was credited with transmitting the Prisca Theologia, the primordial revelation that formed the basis of all true religion and philosophy. Like Saturn, Mercury Hermes was a liminal figure, a guide of souls who could descend to the underworld and return unscathed. This mercurial aspect sheds new light on Saturn's complex identity. Saturn, the supreme limit setter, finds an unexpected counterpart in Mercury, the boundless communicator. Where Saturn binds, Mercury liberates through the power of the word. Yet both deities share an association with esoteric wisdom, with the secret knowledge that allows one to navigate between realms. In alchemy, Mercury plays a central role as the mediating substance, fluidly shifting between states. This mercurial mutability is the key to the alchemical opus, the regeneration of dead matter into living gold. Intriguingly, the planet Mercury is said to be exalted in Virgo, the sign opposite Saturn's nocturnal home of Capricorn. It's as if Mercury's shape-shifting nature is the precise antidote to Saturn's petrifying gaze. The Islamic tradition itself is rooted in revelation, in the book sent down to Muhammad through the archangel Gabriel. Gabriel, as a messenger from the divine realm, is a fundamentally mercurial figure. His recitations to the prophet unfold over time, adapting the eternal message to shifting circumstances, an interplay of Saturn's fixity and Mercury's fluidity. Islam's emphasis on submission to the boundless, unknowable God has a Saturnian flavor, while its prolific textual tradition and adaptability reflect Mercury's influence. Perhaps the most potent image linking Saturn and Mercury is the caduceus, the staff of Hermes entwined with two serpents. This symbol, associated with healing and transformation, evokes the Kundalini energy of yogic tradition, the serpent power that, when awakened, rises through the spine to the crown of the head, mediating between earth and heaven, matter and spirit. The caduceus suggests that the mercurial art lies in bridging the polarities embodied by Saturn, uniting the dark lead of prima materia with the shining gold of the philosopher's stone. Mercury thus emerges as the alchemical key to Saturn's riddle. Where Saturn petrifies, Mercury dissolves. Where Saturn binds, Mercury releases. Yet both gods are united in their esoteric knowledge, their capacity to guide the soul through the labyrinths of incarnation. In their cosmic dialogue, the Saturnian stone is transmuted by the mercurial elixir, the leaden darkness transformed into illuminated gold. The secret Mercury holds is that limitation itself is the gateway to the limitless. That it is only by embracing Saturn's alchemical nigredo that one can attain the albedo of spiritual regeneration. According to medieval tradition, the religion of the Jews originated in a conjunction of Jupiter with Saturn, Islam in Jupiter-Mercury, Christianity in Jupiter-Venus, and the Antichrist in Jupiter-Moon. Let's unpack one of the most extraordinary astrological systems ever conceived. First, the Jewish conjunction, Saturn and Jupiter. Think about what this means. The planet of limitation meeting the planet of expansion. The god of boundaries dancing with the god of growth. Perfect symbol for a religion built on the paradox of chosen limitation as a path to freedom. Then Islam, Jupiter-Mercury, The king planet meets the messenger planet. Divine law meets divine communication. But there's something deeper here. Mercury was associated with Set in Egyptian tradition. The rejected god becomes the messenger of a new revelation, pure alchemical transformation. Christianity emerges from Jupiter-Venus. Justice meets love. But look closer at the timing. In the year 7 BC, this famed conjunction took place no less than 3 times in the sign of the fishes. 3 conjunctions like 3 days in the tomb, and it happens in Pisces, a sign of dissolution and rebirth. But here's what's truly mind-bending. During that 7 BC conjunction, the planets were only 0.21 degrees apart, less than half the width of the full moon. Think about what ancient sky watchers would have seen. The 2 brightest planets nearly merging into one overwhelming light. A cosmic marriage visible to the naked eye. The positioning is crucial, near the bend in the line of the fishes, not just in Pisces, but at the precise point where the 2 fish cords meet. The union happens at the boundary between 2 modes of being, and it gets better. This point was between Aries and Pisces, that is, between fire and water. Elements that shouldn't mix, coming together in cosmic alchemy. Now look at what else was happening. Mars was in opposition, the war god standing against this union of opposites. Jung tells us this opposition of instinct against order becomes peculiarly characteristic of Christianity. It's like the cosmos itself was staging the future drama of spirit versus flesh. But there's more. The anti-Christic conjunction, Jupiter-Moon. Why does the great benefic meeting the planet of reflection and cycles herald the adversary? Because the moon was always associated with illusion, with false light. It's Saturn's principle of limitation, twisted into pure deception. Think about where we are now. The age of Aquarius, Saturn's other sign. After ruling the material world through Capricorn, Saturn manifests as the water-bearer, the dispenser of divine wisdom. It's like cosmic clockwork. The time of rigid structures giving way to the time of flowing transformation. But here's something fascinating about the 4-planet conjunction that Jung only hints at. When Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Mercury align, we're seeing all the principles we've discussed come together. Expansion, Jupiter; limitation, Saturn; opposition, Mars; and transformation, Mercury. It's like watching the cosmic drama of religion itself play out in the heavens. The medieval astrologers saw something profound in this pattern. Each religious conjunction preserves something of Saturn's original nature while transforming it. Judaism keeps the limitation, but makes it holy. Islam keeps the boundary, but makes it a bridge. Christianity keeps the sacrifice, but makes it redemptive. The Antichrist keeps the opposition, but makes it absolute. But what happens when all these principles meet together? The text suggests something remarkable, a moment when the very nature of limitation itself transforms, when Saturn's boundaries become thresholds rather than walls. As we come to the end of our journey through the labyrinth of Saturn's mysteries, we find ourselves standing before a vast and ancient door. It is a door that has been sealed for ages, guarded by the dark figure of Saturn himself, the Lord of Boundaries and the Keeper of Secrets. To open this door is to step beyond the limits of our ordinary understanding, to enter a realm where the familiar categories of thought dissolve and reform in strange and terrifying ways. It is to confront the fundamental paradoxes of existence, the koan-like riddles that haunt the boundaries of the known. Saturn, as we have seen, is a god of polarities, a deity who encompasses within himself the most profound contradictions of the cosmos. He is the furthest planet, the one who dwells at the very edge of the solar system, yet he is also the one who governs the innermost recesses of the psyche. He is the lord of form and structure, the one who gives shape and definition to the world. Yet he is also the one who presides over the dissolution of all forms, the return of all things to the formless void. In his benevolent aspect, Saturn is the wise elder, the one who teaches us the value of discipline, responsibility, and respect for limits. He is the one who challenges us to confront our own mortality, to accept the hard necessities of existence. to find meaning and purpose within the boundaries of a finite life. But in his shadow aspect, Saturn is the tyrant, the oppressor, the one who uses limitation and constraint as tools of domination and control. He is the one who binds us in the prison of matter, who condemns us to a life of endless toil and suffering, who mocks our dreams of freedom and transcendence. To walk the path of Saturn is to confront this duality within ourselves, to recognize that the light and the darkness, the creative and the destructive, are not separate powers, but rather two faces of the same mystery. It is to embrace the fact that limitation and negation are not obstacles to be overcome, but rather essential aspects of the divine economy, sacred powers that must be honored and integrated if we are to find wholeness and completion. This is the secret that Saturn guards at the threshold of the cosmos, the great mystery that he challenges us to unravel. It is the mystery of the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites, the recognition that all dualities are ultimately grounded in a higher unity, a deeper truth that transcends the categories of rational thought. To grasp this mystery is to undergo a profound transformation of consciousness, a radical rewiring of the mind and the soul. It is to step beyond the limits of the ego, to shatter the illusion of separateness, to recognize that the self and the world, the knower and the known, are ultimately one and the same. This is the great work that Saturn calls us to undertake, the alchemical opus that leads from the base matter of ignorance and illusion to the gold of illuminated consciousness. It is a work that requires great courage, great patience, and great humility, for it demands nothing less than the total surrender of the ego, the complete sacrifice of the self on the altar of the greater mystery. Yet for those who dare to embark on this path, for those who are willing to face the darkness within and without, Saturn holds the promise of a great reward. For at the end of the Saturnian journey, at the summit of the cosmic mountain, there lies a treasure beyond all reckoning, a pearl of great price that is none other than the philosopher's stone itself. This stone, the lapis philosophorum, is the supreme goal of the alchemical quest, the ultimate fruit of the great work. It is the symbol of the perfected self, the self that has been purified of all dross and imperfection, the self that has been transformed into a pure vessel for the divine light. To attain this stone is to achieve the ultimate Saturnian synthesis, the reconciliation of all opposites, the union of spirit and matter, form and formlessness, being and non-being. It is to become a living embodiment of the cosmic mystery, a microcosm that reflects the macrocosm in all its infinite complexity and beauty. This is the promise that Saturn holds out to us, the great gift that he offers to those who are willing to walk his winding path through the cycles of time. It is a gift that is not easily won, for it requires nothing less than the complete transformation of the self, the utter annihilation of the ego in the fires of cosmic consciousness. Yet for those who persevere, for those who are willing to endure the trials and the ordeals of the Saturnian path, the reward is beyond all measure. For in the end, the philosopher's stone is none other than the divine spark within us, the immortal flame that burns at the heart of all creation. To realize this spark, to awaken to our own divine nature, is to become one with the mystery that Saturn embodies, to join in the great cosmic dance that is the eternal play of light and darkness, form and formlessness, being and non-being. This is the ultimate meaning of the Saturnian initiation, the supreme goal of the alchemical opus. It is a goal that can only be achieved through the most profound inner transformation, the most radical self-transcendence, the most complete surrender to the greater mystery. Yet even as we strive towards this goal, even as we seek to attain the philosopher's stone and realize our own divine nature, we must never forget the lesson that Saturn teaches us, the fundamental truth that underlies all his mysteries. For in the end, the Saturnian path is not about escape from the world, not about transcending the limits of human existence. Rather, it is about learning to live within those limits, to find meaning and purpose within the boundaries of a finite life, to embrace the hard necessities of existence with courage, integrity, and grace. This is the true wisdom of Saturn, the deep understanding that comes from confronting the darkness within and without, from wrestling with the fundamental paradoxes of existence. It is a wisdom that does not seek to avoid suffering, but rather to transform it, to alchemize it into the gold of spiritual insight and self-realization. As we stand before the great door of Saturn's mysteries, as we prepare to cross the threshold into the unknown, let us remember this wisdom. Let us take it to heart as we embark on the great journey of the soul. For in the end, the path of Saturn is none other than the path of life itself, the winding road that leads through darkness and light, through joy and sorrow, through birth and death and rebirth. It is a path that challenges us to confront our deepest fears, to face our own mortality, to find the courage to live with authenticity, integrity, and purpose. Yet it is also a path that promises great rewards, that offers the possibility of profound transformation, of ultimate self-realization and cosmic consciousness. It is a path that leads to the very heart of the mystery, to the hidden treasure that lies buried within us, waiting to be discovered and claimed as our own. So let us step forward into the darkness. Let us cross the threshold of Saturn's door with courage and resolve. Let us embrace the challenges and the trials of the Saturnian path, knowing that they are the very means by which we will be transformed, the crucible in which our souls will be forged and purified. And let us never forget the great gift that Saturn offers us, the supreme treasure that lies at the end of the journey. For in the end, the philosopher's stone is none other than the divine spark within us, the immortal flame that burns at the heart of all creation. To realize this spark, to awaken to our own divine nature, is to become one with the mystery that Saturn embodies, to join in the great cosmic dance that is the eternal play of light and darkness, form and formlessness, being and non-being. This is the ultimate promise of the Saturnian path, the great hope that sustains us through all the trials and tribulations of the journey. It is a hope that transcends the boundaries of time and space, that reaches beyond the limits of human understanding to touch the very source of all that is. In the end, the way of Saturn is the way of the soul, the path of inner transformation and self-realization. It is a path that leads through the darkest depths of the psyche, through the most profound challenges and ordeals, to the summit of spiritual awakening and cosmic consciousness. As we come to the end of our exploration of Saturn's mysteries, let us take a moment to reflect on all that we have learned, on all that we have encountered along the way. Let us give thanks for the wisdom and the insight that Saturn has bestowed upon us, for the challenges and the opportunities for growth that he has placed before us. And let us resolve to continue on this path, to keep walking the winding road of the soul, knowing that each step brings us closer to the ultimate goal, to the supreme realization of our own divine nature. For in the end, the journey of Saturn is the journey of life itself, the great adventure of the soul as it seeks to find its way back home, back to the source from which it came. It is a journey that belongs to each and every one of us, a path that we must all walk in our own unique way. So let us go forward with courage and determination. Let us embrace the challenges and the mysteries of the Saturnian path with open hearts and minds. Let us trust in the wisdom of the cosmos, in the great intelligence that underlies all things, knowing that we are held and guided every step of the way. And let us never lose sight of the great promise that awaits us at the end of the journey, the supreme treasure that is our birthright as children of the cosmos. For in the end, the philosopher's stone is none other than the radiant jewel of our own true nature, the diamond-like clarity of our own awakened consciousness. This is the great gift that Saturn holds out to us, the supreme offering that he makes to all those who are willing to walk his winding path through the cycles of time. It is a gift that is beyond all measure, a treasure that is worth more than all the riches of the world. So let us claim this gift as our own. Let us seize the great opportunity that Saturn presents to us. Let us walk the path of the soul with grace and courage, knowing that each step brings us closer to the ultimate realization of our own divine potential. And let us always remember the great truth that Saturn teaches us, the fundamental wisdom that underlies all his mysteries. That the path to enlightenment is the path of self-knowledge, the journey of inner transformation, and self-realization. For in the end, the way of Saturn is the way of the sage, the path of the wise one who knows that the greatest treasure lies within, that the ultimate goal is none other than the awakening of the soul to its own true nature. This is the great work that awaits us, the supreme task that Saturn sets before us. It is a work that will demand everything of us, that will challenge us to the very depths of our being. But it is also a work that promises the greatest rewards, that offers the possibility of ultimate fulfillment and cosmic consciousness. It is a work that is worth everything we can give it, everything we can offer on the altar of the soul. So let us embrace this work with all our hearts. Let us give ourselves fully to the path of Saturn and the journey of the soul. Let us walk this path with courage and dedication, knowing that each step brings us closer to the ultimate goal, to the supreme realization of our own divine nature. And let us trust in the great wisdom of the cosmos, in the deep intelligence that guides us on our way. For in the end, the path of Saturn is none other than the path of life itself. The great adventure of the soul as it seeks to find its way back home, back to the source from which it came. This is the ultimate promise of the Saturnian path, the great hope that sustains us through all the trials and tribulations of the journey. It is a hope that transcends the boundaries of time and space, that reaches beyond the limits of human understanding to touch the very heart of the mystery. So let us go forward with faith and courage. Let us walk the winding road of Saturn with open hearts and minds. Let us embrace the challenges and the opportunities of this path, knowing that they are the very means by which we will be transformed, the crucible in which our souls will be forged and purified. And let us always remember the great truth that Saturn teaches us, the fundamental wisdom that is the key to all his mysteries, that the path to enlightenment is the path of self-discovery, the journey of inner transformation and self-realization. For in the end, the way of Saturn is the way of the wise, the path of those who know that the greatest treasure lies within, that the ultimate goal is none other than the awakening of the soul to its own true nature. This is the great work that awaits us, the supreme task that Saturn sets before us. It is a work that will demand everything of us, that will challenge us to the very depths of our being. But it is also a work that promises the greatest rewards, that offers the possibility of ultimate liberation and cosmic consciousness. It is a work that is worth everything we can give it, everything we can offer on the altar of the soul. So let us embrace this work with all our hearts. Let us give ourselves fully to the way of Saturn and the journey of the soul. Let us walk this path with courage and dedication, knowing that each step brings us closer to the ultimate goal, to the supreme realization of our own divine potential. And let us trust in the great wisdom of the cosmos, in the deep intelligence that guides us on our way. For in the end, the path of Saturn is none other than the path of life itself, the great adventure of the soul as it seeks to find its way back home, back to the source from which it came. This is the promise and the challenge of the Saturnian path, the mystery and the mastery that awaits us on the winding road of the soul. May we all find the courage and the wisdom to walk this path to its ultimate conclusion, to embrace the great work of self-discovery and self-realization. And may the blessings of Saturn be with us always, guiding us and sustaining us on our journey until we finally arrive at the summit of cosmic consciousness, at the supreme realization of our own divine nature. So mote it be.